This video is sponsored by Green Man Gaming. What makes Space Marines unique? Because arguably they're not. I mean, there's Halo, Starship Troopers, Old Man's War, StarCraft, Buzz Lightyear. The idea of a Marine in space is not a new one, but the Space Marines are something special. And one of the reasons I think that is because of how well the lore works with the toys. How come when you go to a game store, you see Space Marines in all sorts of weird, wacky colors and styles? Well, that is perfectly accurate to the actual lore. Space Marines were 20 founding chapters filled with flavor from the Emperor, and after half of them turned to chaos, the remainder were broken into sub-factions. So you've got your big, bold flavor text for each faction, but then underneath, you've got all of the little subcategories that make them interesting. Players can find what they like, let's say Blood Angels. They love there's heraldry and honor and red and glistening gold weapons. But maybe you like some of that, but you want to leave some of that behind. Well then, the Flesh Terrors are for you. Successor chapters are where Games Workshop gets to have a second try, using the bones of the OG factions, whether it's wolves in space, medieval knights with lightsabers, blue, or vampires in Iron Man suits, like in this case. The basic idea can get recontextualized, and gives the lore writers at Games Workshop and hobbyists free reign to do anything and have it be canonically accurate. The basic Intercessor sprue might be shared by all Space Marines, but when it is time to pick a color, that's when it gets interesting. That's when a Grey Marine becomes a Flesh Terror, one of the most vicious, nastiest Marines in the history of the Imperium. The Flesh Terrors hail from a death world called Tertassia, which means birthplace of wrath. But I don't think a death world is what I want to pick for my little guy. I think a simple ruined city will show him off perfectly. And you know what else has some ruined city? That's right, Space Marine 2. A big thanks to Green Man Gaming for sponsoring this Space Marine. And speaking of Space Marines, right now you can save 13% on the highly anticipated Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 on PC over at Green Man Gaming. And the fun doesn't stop there either. They've given me the voucher code GMGXPSEP, which will give you instant access to the highest tier of their XP system, Gold. Gold XP members get the best discounts guaranteed, as well as exclusive offers and giveaways over at Green Man Gaming. Once signed up as a Gold XP member, you'll be able to save extra on Space Marine 2. So follow the link below to take your gaming to the next level with Gold XP over at Green Man Gaming. The genius of Games Workshop Space Marines is how they interact with the lore, because they can never end up in a situation where they have to leave something cool off the table because of lore. The Blood Angels are bloodthirsty vampiric savages, but through the unbelievable discipline of their Primarch Sanguinius, he was able to craft and mold them into fine, upstanding citizens, the absolute pinnacle of what a Space Marine can be. But wouldn't it be cool if they weren't? And Games Workshop can be like, yeah, that is pretty cool, write that down, we'll call them the Flesh Terrors. And this little fella right here, this completely unaltered, unembellished Intercessor Space Marine, can be a Flesh Terror with nothing other than paint. And maybe a cool base. To do this, I took some thin cork and made myself a circle that'll fit perfectly on a 32mm base. Then I carefully broke it apart, making sure to keep track of where all the bits go, setting it aside like a completed puzzle, and then one by one taking each piece and gluing it down to the base so there's a very subtle seam between the chunks. It's like a cork pizza. I poked a few holes in the cork to reinforce the damage and then squeezed out some Tamiya basic putty and smoothed over the cork texture just like I'm putting plastic sauce on my cork pizza. Then to add some toppings, I took a little piece of cork and added a little crumb on top to make it look more realistic. Just a few simple steps to get a good base for my Space Marine. I don't want to glue my Marine down just yet. The putty is still wet and it'll be easier to paint them separately anyway, so I put them on paint handles and got ready to prime. And then when I reached for my primer, I made a fun discovery. I just want to commemorate the moment. This jumbo bottle of black Vallejo primer is empty and I gotta crack into a new one. This cap right here, this was clear a year and a half ago. There's a seal I gotta break. A lot of models and a lot of memories are in that old bottle of primer, but it's time for a fresh start. I cracked the seal and dropped a few fish tank pebbles in for mixing, and then primed my Flesh Terrors in his base. Now for painting. Flesh Terrors wear red, just like the Blood Angels, but it's not a bright fire truck red, more of a deep, almost magenta red. I think this wine red color will do the trick. I hosed him down, base coating him in this wine red, and then sprayed bright red from above just like a zenithal. And unlike the Blood Angels, the Flesh Terrors actually have a second color, black. I put white and black on my palette and then mixed up a dark gray, and I put this on his shoulder pads, helmet, backpack, the in-between parts of his armor, his bolter, and his chest imperialis. Now that my base coats are applied, I thinned down some Nuln Oil 50/50 and splashed this over the entire model to shade the recesses. The Flesh Terrors are a very old chapter of Space Marines, coming from the second founding when Gilliman said no more legions, and all of the first founding legions were broken down into successor chapters. And the Flesh Terrors were never meant to exist for very long, I don't think, because they took all of the worst, most disagreeable, barely controllable Blood Angels and put them all into the Flesh Terrors chapter. They were all knocking on the door of succumbing to the Black Rage, and were kind of doomed. However, through sheer violence and uncontrollable rage, they have managed to hang on for the entirety of the 10,000 years since 30k into 40k, and they've kind of made a name for themselves. There's a story with the Flesh Terrors where they were fighting alongside their parent company, the Blood Angels, and Asterath, the chaplain whose job it is to finish off any Death Company Marines who fall to the Black Rage and give them the Emperor's final blessing. Now, Asterath killed a few Flesh Terrors Death Company members, and their chapter master, Gabriel Seth, gave him a talking to. He went up to Asterath and was like, "You will never again judge one of my battle brothers," and then proceeded to fight Asterath and lose because it's Asterath. But that left such an impression on him that later on, when the Flesh Terrors were on trial for crimes against humanity, and they were guilty, Asterath actually came to the chapter's defense, basically saying, "I know they're awful, and I know that they're uncontrollable, but the Flesh Terrors are pretty darn cool, so we should keep them as a real chapter." And that just sums up exactly what the Flesh Terrors are all about. They're kinda just Chaos Space Marines, but without any spikes. Now, I've got this model base coated and washed, and he's kinda done. I could slap some decals on there and call it a day, and this is what I love about Space Marines. He already looks pretty darn good with just some simple steps thrown on him. Now, anything else I do will not only make him look way better, but it's also gonna be really fun to paint. I love me a good highlight, and Marines are some of the most fun models to highlight because of how simple the shapes that make up their armor are. So I took some bright red onto my brush and started highlighting, hitting all the top areas with some scratchy highlights. The Flesh Terrors are bloodthirsty, so I don't want them to look too clean and polished. Then after the red highlights, I took some orange paint and put this over the red highlights, not covering them, just accenting it. If I put on too much orange, the armor will start to look orange and not red. The armor needs to be at least 90% red to look right. I treated these orange highlights just like some subtle edge highlights and specular highlights, the brightest peaks of light reflecting off the armor. Then for the black parts, highlighting black is always tricky. I mixed up some slightly lighter shades of gray and started doing the same style of highlights I did on the armor, and I think this wasn't as successful. The vibrancy of the red color hides a lot of the crimes of the sloppy fast highlights, but in grayscale, those jumps in value are a lot more noticeable. But in the end, the freehanding will cover most of it. And speaking of freehanding, this intercessor is a member of the tactical discipline, so he gets a big white arrow on his right shoulder pad and the Flesh Terror's buzzsaw on the left. I laid down the bones of these symbols in a gray color so it would cover better over the black, then went over again and again until they were fully opaque. The Flesh Terror symbol is tricky. I painted a bunch of little teeth coming out radially from the circle and then going over these again with smaller lines to make the hooked teeth. I added way too many teeth, so I went back over my original shoulder pad color and erased these, then poked and prodded the symbol with more and more white and gray paint until I had something that looked about right. Then in the middle of both symbols, I used my blood wine to put a big red blood drop using some bright red to highlight one half of each drop and then a dot of white on the other half to make it look 3D. The blood drop helps a lot to pull focus away from the imperfections in my freehanding, and I think later on I'll be able to hide even more of these crimes later. Whew, Flesh Terror's buzzsaw, definitely not an easy symbol to paint, although I bet I would get better at it if I did it over and over and over again. And pro tip, if anyone wants to play the Flesh Terrors, make friends with the Deathwatch player, because every Deathwatch veteran kit comes with 2 sculpted Flesh Terror's shoulder pads. My Flesh Terror is nearly complete. Now that I have the paint done on his armor, it's time to messy up that armor with one of my favorite techniques, sponging. I sponged on some of my dark gray color over the symbols, making them look chipped and weathered. Then I used a sharp brush to add some little scratches running over the symbols. It feels a little weird after spending an hour carefully painting a symbol to just throw some paint over it in a few seconds, but it adds a ton of realism to the mini. I used a light gray to highlight his undersuit, and then I sponged some dark gray over his red armor too, just enough so the red matches the damage of his black parts. And you know what else matches the damage? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like our new Nick and Jay dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain pack or any previous pack we have ever made. This month, we here at Eons of Battle are proud to announce the Whimsical Cottages. Fantasy buildings perfect for any game with a ye olde flair. Move your models around the quaint homes, the roomy houses, or set up shop with the tavern. With this terrain, you can make an entire town, complete with pumpkins, giant mushrooms, and trees to really fill out a game board. Onto his holy bolter. The Flesh Terrors keep it simple with their guns. Black for the accent color and silver on everything else. After a base coat on the metal bits, I picked out the cartridges and Imperialis with gold. A nice reminder that these guys used to be Blood Angels, and I threw a wash over the whole thing. Next up, the eyes, which glow green. I base coated the lenses with a white paint and then glazed on some green paint, watering it down and putting it around the eye sockets to make it look like it's glowing. These eyes are the only instance of green on the mini, so they stand out strong, bringing a lot of attention to his mean stare. Now for the base, and it's going to be just as simple to paint as it was to make. A little bit of dry brushing of some leftover gray I had on my palette, and then mixed up a slurry of burnt umber pigment powder and water, giving the base a coat. This powder dries ultra matte and will fill in a lot of the surface imperfections and stop any reflections, making the ground look smooth and give a very different texture to the mini standing on top. It's always really satisfying to glue a mini's feet to the base and call it done. The Flesh Terror Space Marines, the bad boy Blood Angels. If I was to ever collect Blood Angels, it would definitely be Flesh Terror's chapter, and I've actually painted a Blood Angel, but the Flesh Terror was a lot more fun to paint. And in terms of their rules, I am really envious of the Blood Angels. I play Black Templar, I play exclusively close combat focused Space Marines, and the Black Templar are cool, because we have Sword Brethren, one of the most powerful close combat units in the game. However, when I look at the rest of the Space Marine Codex, and all of those close combat units, they're pretty much universally bad. But that's where the Sons of Sanguinius Blood Angels detachment comes in, because that detachment gives all melee close combat weapons on the charge +2 strength and +1 attack. Whoa, all of a sudden, every data sheet in the Space Marine Codex changes. What, like scouts. Scouts are going from 3 punches, strength 4, to 4 punches, strength 6. Same with this normal intercessor's fists. Assault Centurions, instead of 3 attacks, strength 10, it's 4 attacks, strength 12. Like, oh, I read those rules and I get so jealous because all of a sudden, it's like, well, all of a sudden, all those models are so much better than all my models, and all that changed is a detachment. I should just run my Black Templar in Sons of Sanguinius detachment just a couple of times just to get it out of my system, but man, the Blood Angels are the cool close combat Space Marines right now. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and please leave a comment below what Space Marine chapter would you like to take a look at next, because I am having a hoot of a time painting every different color of Space Marines.